What'd you say?
What were they doing?
We drove by and the gentleman was slapping the girl.
He was slapping her?
Yes.
That was the initial statement from an anonymous witness who called 911 in the town of Moab, Utah, in the scorching heat of August 2021. As police approached the white van parked on the side of the road, a body cam captured the image of a young woman with teary eyes, constantly wiping away tears and taking all the blame. "I'm the one who caused trouble. I'm sorry," she said, while her boyfriend, a cool and reserved young man of the same age, stood next to her, barely showing any emotion. The girl was Gabby Petito, 22, a travel blogger who was traveling across the U.S. in a van with her boyfriend, Brian Laundrie. On social media, they were the dream couple. Photos filled with majestic nature, bright smiles, and the inspirational hashtag #VanLifeNumberSign. But behind the Instagram filters and carefully edited vlogs, something was breaking. The atmosphere was getting more tense by the day, and within weeks of that video, the entire country would be shocked by the unexpected turn of events. Subscribe now to join us as we unravel the mystery of a case that shocked the nation. A true story full of surprises, drama, and haunting. In the summer of 2021, Gabby Petito and her boyfriend Brian Laundrie began a journey across the United States in a white van from Florida. On social media, they shared their dreamy, nomadic life with photos in national parks, forests, and deserts in the West. Those moments quickly attracted a large number of followers, turning Gabby into a new symbol of the free and wild van life lifestyle. However, that freedom could not hide the increasingly obvious cracks between the two. The small space, the pressure of constant travel, and the differences in personalities seemed to gradually strain the relationship. On August 12th in Moab, Utah, a passerby reported to the police that a man was violently abusing his girlfriend in the middle of the street. When the police approached, Gabby said she was the one who caused the trouble because she was stressed, while Brian calmly insisted that they had just had a small argument. After talking, the police suggested that they temporarily sleep separately for a night to cool off, then let them continue their journey. In the following weeks, Gabby continued to appear on Instagram, but something was different. Her photos became less frequent. Her smiles became more forced. Notably, her messages to her mother began to become erratic, using strange words as if the sender was no longer Gabby herself. On August 25th, she posted her last photo, taken in Grand Teton, Wyoming, and then went completely silent. Notably, Brian returned to Florida. Remarkably, he returned alone, driving the car that had belonged to both of them, but did not contact Gabby's family or report anything. Any questions from the Petito family fell on deaf ears. Brian refused to provide information, his family also avoided it, and only responded through their lawyer. That attitude turned Gabby's family's anxiety into real fear. By September 11th, they officially reported Gabby missing to the police. The news spread quickly on social media, where thousands of people who had followed her journey began to piece together the facts. During the search, a YouTuber family accidentally filmed a white van parked on the edge of the Grand Teton forest, a video that would later become a turning point in the investigation. As time passed, Brian remained uncooperative. On September 13, he suddenly left the house without a trace. It was only when clues were gradually revealed that people were startled to realize behind the beautiful photos was a suffocating relationship and silent distress signals. But no one listened soon enough. A trip that was expected to be the beginning of a future ended up leading to an unexpected, heartbreaking ending. On September 11th, 2021, as the United States was preparing for the 20th anniversary of 9/11, the Petito family in New York quietly entered their own crisis. For more than 2 weeks, they had not been able to contact Gabby, something that had never happened before. The girl who was close to her mother had lost contact with her, and the family felt uneasy, especially when recent messages from Gabby suddenly became curt and distant, as if written by someone else. They immediately reported Gabby missing to the Suffolk County Police Department, requesting emergency assistance. Authorities quickly expanded their coordination from the Northport Police Department in Florida, where Gabby had lived with her boyfriend, to Wyoming, the last location on her social media account. Meanwhile, the media began to get involved, and a series of articles, videos, and comments spread quickly across digital platforms. The online community, especially those who had followed Gabby's nomadic journey, became a giant tracking network. They searched through each post, each story, and began to notice strange gaps. A video accidentally posted by a YouTuber family on an RV trip attracted special attention. In the video, they accidentally recorded the image of a white van lying still in the middle of the Grand Teton forest, a perfect match for the vehicle that appeared on Gabby's Instagram page. Based on the coordinates from the clip, the FBI and the Forest Service narrowed down the area of Spread Creek, the place where the vehicle was believed to be the last stop. On September 19, they deployed a search team including forensic experts, dogs, and drones to scan every piece of wilderness. By late afternoon, a team had discovered a lightly disturbed area of land, and soon after, a female body, loosely covered in a grassy field strewn with rocks. Although no official conclusion had been reached, the initial clues, from the clothing to the figure to the tattoos, all raised a grim suspicion. This could be Gabby Petito. Authorities sealed off the scene and began an autopsy in silence, paying close attention to every detail. There was no sign of natural disaster or the presence of wild animals, just an eerie silence and evidence of human intervention. News of the body was an immediate sensation. As authorities continued DNA testing and forensics, the nation's attention was drawn to the case. From an online dream travel story, Gabby's journey had now entered its final chapter, painful and unexpected. In the twilight of the Grand Teton, the area where the body was found was immediately cordoned off. The forensic team began to carefully comb the scene. There was no obvious trail leading in, no tire tracks or signs of a struggle, just a clearing, sparsely grassed and eerily quiet, as if time had stood still for weeks. The victim's body was found face down, the upper body buried shallowly in the gravelly soil, with no heavy objects or obstructions to conceal it. This was not a burial, but a hasty, almost desperate concealment. Nearby, the authorities collected a number of personal items, a bracelet, some jewelry, and a notebook with water-stained ink. These items helped to identify the victim and also to reconstruct the victim's final moments. The forensic report released later concluded that the victim had died from strangulation, with an estimated time of death of 3 to 4 weeks before being found. There were no knife wounds nor any defensive injuries, suggesting that the crime had occurred very quickly in a situation where the victim had no time to react. The fact that the body was poorly concealed and there were no signs of third-party intervention led investigators to a clear hypothesis. The perpetrator was not a stranger, and the act may have stemmed from a moment of loss of control between two acquaintances. After the body was identified as Gabby Petito, the FBI quickly shifted its focus from the search to the criminal investigation. All data, evidence, and witnesses were reviewed from the beginning, and the most prominent name in the file was none other than Brian Laundrie, the only boyfriend who accompanied Gabby on the journey across the United States. Not only was Brian the last person known to be with Gabby, but he was also the only one who returned without providing any explanation. He had been in Florida since early September, but for the next 10 days, when Gabby was reported missing, Brian chose to remain silent. His family also avoided contact with the investigation agency and agreed to exchange information only through a lawyer. That closed-off attitude made the public wonder. On September 13th, while all the attention was focused on Brian, the family suddenly reported that he had left the house in the morning and had not returned. They said that Brian had said he was going to walk into the nearby Carlton Nature Reserve, a wild, flooded, and complex terrain. The loss of a key figure in the case caused public outrage. Many people suspected that the Laundrie family knew in advance and deliberately let him escape. While the search team waded through streams and forests in Florida to track down Brian, the FBI focused on analyzing evidence from the van. The results of the examination discovered many important details: tiny bloodstains, a few long hairs matching Gabby's, and especially the computer hard drive and notebook, although partially damaged by water. Using dash cams and security footage from the Grand Teton area, the FBI was able to reconstruct the van's route during the pivotal time period. Several frames showed the van stopping at what would later be identified as the crime scene, but there was no report from the owner. That only added to the unusual nature of Brian's behavior. Another twist came when the FBI discovered that a bank card in Gabby's name had been used at an ATM in Florida after her suspected death. While not enough to warrant murder charges, the act was a crime. A federal arrest warrant was immediately issued, a tactic often used to pressure an indirect suspect. But Brian was nowhere to be found. Weeks passed, and rescue teams with dogs, drones, and divers found no clear trace. Meanwhile, the FBI's technical analysis team expanded the investigation, retrieving GPS data from electronic devices, extracting text messages from Gabby's phone, and especially reprocessing the notebook they had collected. As each page dried, they discovered a handwritten confession. "I did it. I can't live without her." On October 20th, 2021, the search finally yielded results. Near a high ground in the Carlton Reserve, which had been flooded by heavy rains, the investigation team discovered a backpack containing personal belongings. Not far away, a partially decomposed body was found. Dental and DNA tests confirmed it was Brian Laundrie. Cause of death: self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Although the case never had a formal trial, the FBI released the entire investigative file afterward, with physical evidence, handwritten diaries, digital data, and behavior before and after the incident. They concluded that Brian was directly responsible for Gabby's death. The Gabby Petito case ended not with a verdict from the court, but with the undeniable truth in the investigation file. It also left a profound message. Silence, if not listened to and investigated thoroughly, can hide a tragedy. In the digital world, where beautiful photos can obscure reality, the data and the truth will always be there if only someone is patient enough to find it. When the FBI's investigation results were officially announced in early 2022, many hoped for a court hearing to clarify the entire course of the case, but the death of Brian Laundrie prevented any legal proceedings from continuing along the traditional path. With no defendant to prosecute, the justice system was forced to close the case as a concluded investigation instead of a trial and sentencing. At a press conference held by the FBI, the investigation agency representative presented the full chain of evidence that had been collected, from traces at the scene, indirect statements, to electronic data related to the suspect's itinerary and behavior. Forensic experts confirmed that no one other than Brian had ever been present at the location where Gabby was found. The use of her bank account after her death, along with personal notes acknowledging responsibility, is the basis for the conclusion. This was not an accident or the actions of a third party. The community was shocked by an ending without judgment, without questioning, without explanation. What Brian left behind in form was just a few notes, but it suggested a simmering tragedy that many people believe began a long time ago, from small arguments to growing silence. The Petito family, despite their heartache, still showed a strong spirit. Instead of stopping at the loss, they chose to continue the journey to demand justice for other victims. The organization, the Gabby Petito Foundation, was established with the goal of supporting people trapped in unhealthy relationships, where warning signs are often ignored or overlooked. Gabby's case has prompted a broader discussion about community responsibility, the legal aid system, and the role of social media in detecting and exposing potential threats. Many lawmakers have called for early response procedures when reporting violence in relationships, especially when evidence is provided via camera or digital platforms. Although there was no verdict in the courtroom, the case has left a deep mark on the public, because sometimes it is the unanimous voice of society, through each article, clip, conversation, that becomes a real court of justice, where the voice of the victim is heard even when they are no longer present. Gabby Petito's death is not only a personal tragedy, but also reflects a painful gap in the way society views seemingly normal relationships. A young girl who once carried the desire to explore, experience, and share with the world, was ultimately deprived of her voice when her journey was still unfinished. What makes many people most troubled is not that the incident happened too quickly, but that it happened after a series of signals had appeared, from changes on social networks to avoidance in communication and unusual expressions in the behavior of the person accompanying her. All of these things have been seen, but no one is sure if they really understood them correctly. Since the incident, many organizations and communities have re-examined the way they approach relationships that show signs of breaking down. The conversation has expanded beyond personal relationships to include legal, technological, and educational issues. Social media platforms are rolling out warning features, while victim support organizations are getting more funding to act quickly. Gabby is no longer here, but if her story helps someone avoid danger, if it makes a friend or family member notice the smallest changes, that will be her most vivid legacy. And what about you? If you were a witness, what would you do if you saw something strange growing in a relationship that seemed so peaceful? Sunday morning, May 8th, 2005, Mother's Day. The air in the town of Zion, Illinois was filled with peace. While many families were gathering around the breakfast table, two girls, Laura Hobbs, 8, and Crystal Tobias, 9, left their house as usual. They were best friends who had grown up together, familiar with every corner and path around the park near their home. That morning was no different, a seemingly normal day with blue skies and birds chirping in the trees along the road. No one expected that, a few hours later, the whole town would fall into panic. But by evening, the girls had not returned. From the initial anxiety, a large-scale search was quickly launched. Relatives, neighbors, police, and even dogs spread out throughout the park, every small path, every thicket. Darkness fell, and hope gradually faded, until dawn. At 6 a.m., in the dim light of early morning, Laura's father, Jerry Hobbs, suddenly shouted in panic from the middle of the park, "I found them! They're dead!" It was no longer a search. It was the beginning of a nightmare that would last for years. A case that shook America, where the father, the first to find his daughter's body, became the prime suspect. But the truth, as it turned out, was far more horrifying. That afternoon, the town was still immersed in its familiar peace. No one noticed that, among the shady trees and the maze-like gravel road, two children were slowly disappearing from sight, never to return. Both disappeared into that seemingly harmless space. When dinner had cooled and there was no sign of her children, Laura's mother began to step out onto the porch, her eyes scanning the street. No one answered her calls. A feeling of unease crept in. The family quickly spread out along the streets, calling out Laura and Crystal's names in vain. As the night wore on, the fear grew. Neighbors gradually joined in. Flashlights were squinted through the bushes, Every corner of the park was carefully searched. At around 9 p.m., the police were called in. Dogs were brought in. Flyers with pictures of the two girls began to be hastily printed and distributed throughout the neighborhood. Despite the mobilization of many forces, the darkness and the absolute silence of the park left everyone with only one question. Where had the children gone? Night fell, but the anxiety grew. The whole town hardly slept. Every sound of a passing car made someone's heart skip a beat. By dawn, Jerry Hobbs had not given up. And then, a scream tore through the morning mist, cutting through the silence. No one knew what had just happened, but in that moment, the whole park froze. A horrifying revelation had just come, ending the search and opening a nightmare that would last for years to come. And that, unfortunately, put him at the center of the suspicion. After a long night, while many others had given up, Jerry Hobbs and his father-in-law continued to walk in silence. No one knew what they hoped for, only the silhouettes of two men quietly disappearing into the mist of dawn. The sky gradually turned to the pale gray of dawn. The first rays of sunlight had not yet penetrated the foliage when from deep in the park, a sudden scream rang out, tearing the silence. No one heard what he said, but when people ran towards them, they suddenly stopped. Not because of panic, but because they were facing something that no one dared to believe was true. The place was not far, only a few dozen meters from the main path, but all night no one stopped. Not because it was so dense, but because no one expected something so terrible to happen in the middle of a familiar park. But there, the truth had lain dormant for hours, under the rotting leaves and the cold morning mist. In the dark grass, two small bodies lay side by side in silence. Neither said a word. They seemed to have been waiting for someone together for hours in the dark. Within seconds of seeing the scene, Jerry pulled out his phone, his voice breaking in a 911 call. I found the kids. They're dead. The police arrived within minutes. They quickly cordoned off the area, asking everyone to keep their distance. Forensic units were called in, yellow tape was strung around the bushes, and each location was carefully marked. The lieutenant in charge of the scene, a veteran, immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. There were no signs of a major struggle, but the amount of blood on the scene suggested a degree of brutality. The fact that both bodies were discovered by relatives also raised a big question. Why did he find the children when dozens of people with dogs had passed through the area the night before without seeing anything? Investigators quickly took Jerry and his father-in-law to headquarters to take initial statements. They also recorded the exact time of the call, the location of the bodies, and the emotional expression of the discoverer. The local press immediately got involved. The first headlines on the morning of May 9th were tragic. 2 girls murdered in park. Father of 1 victim finds bodies. The entire town of Zion was shaken. However, for the investigation team, the shock was even greater. Less than 12 hours after the discovery of the scene, they began to suspect Jerry Hobbs himself might have committed the crime. The area where the bodies were found was a dark patch of land, covered in dense vegetation and without streetlights. The bushes were almost as tall as a person, creating a natural barrier, making it easy to miss during nighttime searches. Under the damp grass, the ground showed signs of disturbance, suggesting the victims may have been dragged there from another location. The 2 girls were lying side by side, their clothes intact but stained with blood. Police found no personal belongings or tire tracks at the scene, an odd detail considering that both had been cycling to the park. The medical examiner conducted an autopsy that morning. Preliminary results showed that Laura Hobbs had been stabbed a total of 20 times, mostly in the chest and abdomen. Crystal Tobias had 11 similar stab wounds, but the level of brutality on Laura was clearly higher. The wound was sharp, indicating that the murder weapon was a small, sharp-pointed knife. However, the most notable detail came from the microscopic analysis. Traces of sexual assault appeared on Laura's body. Samples of strange skin cells under her fingernails and semen left on her clothes were collected for DNA testing. This was a clue that could shape the entire direction of the investigation. However, at that time, the police were still unable to determine the identity of the person who left this biological sample. From the moment the scene was sealed off, the investigators' suspicious eyes turned to one person, Jerry Hobbs. Although he was the victim's biological father, he was the one who discovered the body, while dozens of people and even police dogs searched all night and found nothing. That strange coincidence quickly put him in the crosshairs. Jerry's background was not very bright either. In the past, he had been arrested many times for violent behavior, especially a serious incident in 2001 in Texas, when he was accused of using a chainsaw to chase people after an argument with his wife. The incident caused his wife to take their child and leave, cutting off contact for many years. After completing a short prison sentence for violating probation, he returned to Zion, not long before the murder occurred. With all these negative signs, the police decided to invite Jerry to the headquarters to clarify the details. At first, the interrogation was gentle, but when it entered the third hour, the investigators' attitude began to change. They not only focused on the gaps in his story, but also asked him a series of continuous questions, which quickly exhausted his mentality. Time passed in the closed room without windows. Without enough food or rest, Jerry gradually collapsed. After nearly 20 hours of nonstop questioning, he began to waver. When the investigators hypothesized that he might have lost control in a fit of anger, Jerry nodded. He began to tell a story that he met Laura and Crystal in the park that afternoon. Angry at his daughter's disobedience, he pulled Laura's hand back and the two argued. Crystal intervened, asking him to let go of her friend. According to the testimony, Crystal pulled a small knife from her pocket and threatened him. In a fit of rage, Jerry grabbed the knife and lost control, leading to tragedy. The confession was recorded, and Jerry was immediately arrested. The media quickly reported, "Father kills daughter in anger, shocking confession." Many people could not believe their ears. Laura's family members were stunned, but others felt that there was something wrong with the confession. Indeed, just a few weeks after being detained, Jerry officially recanted all of his statements. He claimed that he had been forced to confess, and that when he had just found his daughter's body, he had completely collapsed. He said that he had not eaten or slept for 2 days, and that the investigators had repeatedly threatened that if he did not confess, he would never see his family again. Not only that, he also accused them of drawing up a script and forcing him to read it on camera as if it were a real confession. However, the prosecution refused to review the case. They insisted that the confession was voluntary and legally valid, especially when it was clearly recorded. So Jerry remained in custody, awaiting trial. Meanwhile, a lawyer assigned to defend Jerry began to sense that something was amiss. After reviewing the case file, her discovered that all the physical evidence collected from the crime scene, from blood stains to skin cells to DNA samples, had never been fully tested. They had simply been stored in the police department's refrigerator, as if the confession had made the biological samples unnecessary. Jerry's lawyer filed a request for an independent examination. After several delays, the lab finally conducted a full analysis of the samples in 2008, 3 years after the crime. The results were shocking. In addition to Laura's blood, there were at least 3 samples of foreign DNA on Laura's body. One of them was sperm, the other 2 were skin cells from under her fingernails and fibers from her shirt. Most importantly, none of the samples matched Jerry Hobbs. Despite being held for 3 years, he was biologically unrelated to the crime scene. The attorneys immediately asked the court to dismiss the charges and release their client. However, the prosecutors fiercely disputed this. They claimed that the foreign DNA could have come from Laura's accidental exposure to the environment, such as couples who had sex in the park. Although this explanation was considered dangerously implausible by many forensic experts, the court still refused to release Jerry. Undeterred, the attorneys asked that the foreign DNA be entered into a national database. The information was stored, awaiting the day when a match would be found. And that day came, but it took nearly 2 more years. In the spring of 2010, thousands of miles from Zion, an arrest was made in Virginia. A young soldier named Jorge Avila Torres was accused of raping and murdering a female soldier in his barracks apartment. When Torres' DNA was taken and entered into a federal database, it immediately matched the samples found on Laura Hobbs. After 5 years in prison for a false confession, Jerry Hobbs was finally cleared. But the damage he had done to his spirit, to his reputation, to his family, was irreparable. When the DNA results came back, the truth was indisputable. The person who left biological traces on Laura Hobbs's body was Jorge Avila Torres, a 21-year-old soldier who was incarcerated in Virginia for a series of serious crimes. Torres had served at the military base in Arlington and was considered a disciplined soldier. But behind that normal appearance was a dangerous predator. In an undercover operation, the police planted a person in his cell and recorded his chilling confession, from the murder of Amanda Snell, a young female soldier, to other kidnappings and rapes. When confronted with the evidence, Torres remained cool, even boasting about the details of what he had done as if it were an achievement. The trial in Virginia ended with Torres sentenced to death for Amanda's murder. He also received 5 life sentences and an additional 168 years for other sexual assaults and kidnappings. But it didn't stop there. Soon after his sentencing, Torres was extradited to Illinois to face charges of murdering Laura and Crystal. His defense attorney initially argued that the DNA evidence was not sufficient to prove murder. But the evidence was overwhelming. Torres had lived in Zion, knew Crystal's brother, and had easy access to the girls. Child witnesses at the time confirmed that they had seen Torres with friends in the park on the day of the murders. Seeing that he had no way out, Torres agreed to plead guilty in a deal with prosecutors. In exchange, he would be transferred from the prison where he was being threatened with violence and receive an additional 100 years in prison instead of facing a second death penalty trial. Meanwhile, Jerry Hobbs, a father who had been wrongly imprisoned for 5 years after a coerced confession, was finally released. After a lengthy legal battle, he received nearly $8 million in compensation from the state, but freedom did not bring a return to form. Jerry withdrew from public life, moving back to Texas, where he grew up. "They didn't have to torture me," he said in a rare interview. "I was shattered the moment I saw my daughter." His life, like the 2 young lives taken that year, will forever be tainted by an irreversible miscarriage of justice. 2 innocent girls never made it home after a short bike ride on a seemingly peaceful afternoon. The deaths of Laura Hobbs and Crystal Tobias are not only a tragedy for one family, but also a chilling warning to society as a whole. In the pain of losing his daughter, Jerry Hobbs was not allowed to hold his daughter's body one last time. Instead, he was handcuffed, locked in a cell, and labeled a murderer. Instead of upholding justice, the judicial system chose the fastest path, convicting a father who had just lost his child with a questionable confession. If the investigative agency had prioritized evidence over emotion from the beginning and had investigated objectively instead of jumping to conclusions, how many lives could have been saved? During the years Jerry was incarcerated, Jorge Avila Torres continued his criminal career. 1 woman was murdered, 3 others were raped and tortured. Each case is a painful reminder that investigative negligence not only denies justice, it also allows evil to continue. The story ends, but the consequences remain. How many people like Jerry Hobbs are still behind bars in America's prisons today? People deprived of their freedom not because of their crimes, but because of unforgivable failures in the system that was built to protect them.